accounting and the future of forensic accounting. And we have three eminent speakers, panelists, who will be deliberating on this topic. And the panel will be led by no other than Rishiji, who is himself, who has always moderated sessions very well and made the sessions very interesting. Thank you, Rishiji, for moderating the session. So we have with us Mr. Harish Dua, one of the panelists, Mr. Durgesh Pandey, and Mr. Satish Shenoy. The three panelists would be taking us through the nuances, through the ups and downs of forensic accounting, the future of forensic accounting, how the profession would look like maybe 10 years down the line. And this perspective will really help us shape the practice of forensic accounting by us practicing professionals in future. Mr. Durgesh Pandey, he's a managing partner in DKMS Associates, Chartered Accountants, and having practicing in the domain of management consultancy and audit since the year 2009, a fellow Chartered Accountant, a diploma in information systems auditor, a certified fraud examiner from ACFE USA, qualified certificate courses in forensic accounting and fraud detection from ICI, and also pursuing a PhD in forensic analysis of financial frauds from Gujarat Forensic Science University. Hoping next year we'll see you as Dr. Durgesh Pandey, sir. Interesting speaker and trainer in various courses, various programs organized by SFIOs, Asianopol, training senior police officers on forensic accounting and aspects, and conducting workshops on forensic accounting across institutes, Indian institutes and foreign institutes. And he has also gained professional exposure in providing various aspects, including investigation of loss claim of over INR 37 crores for a manufacturing company based in India, and various work in Kenya as well. And he has tied up as knowledge partner, as domain expert for designing and presenting a software platform for economic intelligence. Wonderful work being done by Mr. Durgesh Pandey, and we are very, very grateful to have you on with us at ACA, sir. And thank you for accepting the invitation.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. His profile is very, very long. I've just tried to make it short. Thank you, sir, for being there, sir. Mr. Harish Dua, again, an audit and business professional for over 38 years of experience in the area of governance, risk and compliance, and specializing in the area of ethics, internal audit and investigation. A chartered accountant from England, a CPA from USA, and MBA from University of Connecticut, USA. Mr. Dua is also a CFE from Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, USA. Mr. Dua is helping ICI as an advisor, developing forensic accounting and investigation standards. We have the institute has recently released the forensic standards, which we are all must be aware of. They're helping in developing the ICI standards on internal audit, of something which most of us are aware that it exists, but we have seldom read it. We, of course, need to be aware of this again. And he's also an adjunct faculty with the Institute of Corporate Affairs, All India Management Association, and Jaipuria School of Business. Thank you, sir, for being here. And it's a privilege for you to be one of the panelists, sir. The third panelist of the day would be Mr. Satish Shenoy. C.A. Satish Shenoy, a chartered accountant, cost accountant, and 8th rank holder and company secretary. Carrying over 40 years of experience in internal audit, risk management, forensic, and ethics across PSUs and private enterprises such as Hindustan Petroleum and Reliance Retail, heading the audit function at Onida, Lupin, and L&T Group, and also for the Aditya Birla Group. Has involved himself in various capacities in professional accounting and auditing bodies, few trade association and educational institutes. He has also been an author by writing a daily blog, The Reading Corner, and has been doing this unfailingly for the past 12 years. Dedication has it all. Now he is busy. He's always contributing back to the society, associated himself with various NGOs and mentoring of young professionals. A very avid cricket player also. Thank you, sir, for being here, and we look forward to your inputs in the panel discussion. Over to you, Rishiji, for a very wonderful and interesting forensic accounting panel.
Thank you, Chairman Vivek, and thank you, President Vivek. And I welcome all the panelists, Mr. Dua, Mr. Shenoy, and Mr. Pandey, to this panel discussion is a curtain raiser on the forthcoming 15-hour workshop on forensic accounting. Are we ready? And friends, as we all know, that recently we have heard about the biggest ever banking fraud in India about ABG shipyard, 22,000 odd crores. And as per RBI report, H1 in the first half year of FY 21-22, the total banking fraud was 36,000 crore, around 36,000 crore. Then we have a lot of corporate frauds in the public domain, starting all the way from Satyam, and then you have Kingfisher, then we have PMC, DHFL, ILFS, Bhuchan Steel, and so on and so forth. Even for the SME sector, the owners are also very concerned about leakages, about in the stores, leakages, frauds being committed by the employees, and etc. So in this backdrop, in the backdrop of buzzword of forensic in corporate, in New India, as you say, New India, we are here in this panel discussion, being the curtain raiser, as I said, and the idea of the panel discussion is to spark off conversation among our invited panelists and to gain immensely from the years and years of experience and insight on the forensic accounting and auditing. So, sir, we will start with basic questions. I will address it to the respective panelists, and then any of the panelists would like to add anything on those questions, they are most welcome. And thereafter, we will go to more specific questions addressed to the respective panelists. So my first, for the starters, Mr. Shinoy, what is forensic accounting, and is it different from or same to forensic audit? Can you please enlighten the participants?
Actually, there's a lot of difference between both these terms are very used. And this has come out in various, when we were writing the standards. In fact, I feel that this is just yet another standard writing process, because I see Durgesh Bhai, I see our guru Harish also in the panel. But yes, so coming back to the point, it is there is a difference, because in the auditing, it's a very a very general kind of work that is being done. Opinions are given, whether it is true, fair, and whether it's correct, whether the process can be improved, etc., etc. But in the forensic work, there is that much more. It is very, very specific, and you need to discover the truth. There are different ways of getting evidence. The evidence has to be presentable in the court. So these are some of the very top level. I mean, we can go and granulate and then go further into it. But this is the very, very specific thing, that whatever evidence that is being collected needs to be capable of being presented in a court. I think this is one huge difference. Whereas in an audit, it's just an experience, an expression or an opinion which is being presented. I mean, this is just a very dirty, top and dirty view.
Yeah, it's fine. And so, forensic audit and forensic accounting, are they both same? Forensic audit and forensic accounting?
Yeah, accounting. It's actually called forensic accounting, because if you see our standards, so, also standards. Yeah.
So these are interusable terminology, and they indicate the same: forensic audit or forensic accounting. So Dua, may I understand, for the sake of all the participants here who are basically from industry and also from the practice, what are the indicators of potential fraud in a company or in any entity rather? What are the indicators of potential fraud?
Yeah, before I take that question of yours, I just want to thank the ACAE for inviting me. In fact, when the president of ACA calls you, you don't have a choice but to say yes to the invitation, because the president of yours was also involved in the standard setting process.
Yes, very
and he had made contributions, including personal trips. We were having these deliberations like Mumbai, Hyderabad, and other places. So you already have amongst you an expert on the subject matter. Secondly, I want to just finish off the discussion you started with Satish. on the difference. You use the term interchangeability, which is something I want to actually correct. In fact, these two are not interchangeable. Forensic audit, which is not a term at all from a technical point of view, and forensic accounting, which is in fact a technical term acceptable worldwide. Forensic audit is very different. In fact, forensic audit, like I say, is not a term at all. And these standards, actually, these are the standards that I would recommend everybody downloads a copy of this, available very freely from, completely free from the Institute's website. And it will also help you get the terminology corrected, because see, audit is very different than a forensic exercise, forensic accounting exercise, which again is slightly different than an investigation. And these standards help clarify that. And it's very important. And I'm very glad, Rishi, that you actually started our discussion with these terms, because we need to, as professionals, be very clear on which wavelength we're on. See, you cannot be on an audit wavelength and be doing forensic accounting exercise, or be on a forensic accounting assignment and jumping around in an investigative mode. You know, we professionals need to have very clear understanding of where we are actually, based on the agenda, based on the mandate given to us. Be very clear through a dialogue with the client and the other stakeholders. Be very clear as to which one of these three, assignments that we're on, because you cannot out of this whole thing by calling it a forensic audit. Okay, so in fact, that's one of the things that is very important, and I'm hopeful that this will get cleared as part of these kind of exercises that your organization is undertaking, because our first requirement is to make sure that we ourselves are clear in our own minds as to what is it that we're doing. Because if you don't do that, you know, you're going to end up delivering an output which will be a bit of a mishmash, and we don't want that. As a professional organization, all the members have to have that bit of clarity, because it becomes a reputation issue. And a lot of the assignments that we see, and in fact, we talked about it as we were developing these standards, they were not to the mark. Okay, they were in fact some of them quite substandard, which is why the initiative of getting these standards out is there. So without deliberating too much on it, I just wanted to set the tone by endorsing your discussion on this important matter of having complete clarity on what is it that we're doing. I'll get back to your question after you let some of the other ones. I think Durgesh may want to also take off the ball, otherwise I'll take too much time.
So first of all, thank you so much for inviting us, and then keeping me in the what do I say, league of extraordinary gentlemen. Both Satish sir and Harish sir, they are stalwarts, and if I compare my career, I'm a beginner. It's no match to them sitting here, so it's a privilege. Always we learn a lot from both of them, and particularly हरीश भाई तो ही इज कीपिंग द फ्लॉक टुगेदर, तो उनका जो पीपल मैनेजमेंट स्किल है वो तो अलग लेवल पर है, टेक्निकल स्किल तो अपनी जगह पर है ना, लेकिन जो इंटेलेक्चुअल फाइट को, इंटेलेक्चुअल वॉर को, हर वॉर को बैटल में कन्वर्ट करना, बैटल से फ्रे में कन्वर्ट करना, उसके बाद उसको डिफ्यूज कर देना, वो स्किल तो सीखने लायक है हरीश भाई से. नेवरदलेस, सो कमिंग टू द टॉपिक, coming to the topic very quickly, I'll say, so couple of things probably they have emphasized very nicely, but only few things which I'll try to add. So one thing which Harish sir was also telling, and both Satish sir was telling, both of them have told that, see, I'll tell you, audit is a subset of accounting. It's our bad luck that accounting in India is akin to bookkeeping, whereas accounting is not bookkeeping. Accounting is the complete gamut of audit, income, not I would say income tax, but audit and other services, other allied services also. Bookkeeping is just a part of accounting. Whereas in India, the moment you say accountant, it becomes only bookkeeping. That is the irony. So it is not, audit is included in accounting. So as every word what you see in the document, even it is there on my table as well. Every word if you see in the document, we have debated a lot on that, and accounting is deliberately put. It's a conscious language, and we are strongly, if I say collectively we, though the group has been the group is no longer there in existence, but if we collectively say we are strongly discouraging to use the word audit. Rather, accounting is the broader term. Again, couple of points which Harish sir said, I'll just take it off from where he ended. So he said that as a professional, we have to learn to differentiate from the objectives based on the appointment letter. He is very much correct. If every audit assignment you start acting like a forensic accounting engagement, trust me, you'll land nowhere. That mandate is different. We have to understand the difference between reasonable assurance, true and fair, true and correct, expert witness. All these languages have to be understood with context of forensic accounting. So it's very important. Accounting, in those standards, the word forensic accounting is specifically used for the financial misdoings or financial affairs, and the word investigation is used for operational investigations. Say there is a falsification of stock, there is something, I mean, ultimately everything is converted into money, but if there is some issue, some misdemeanor with the non-financial aspect, then we go to the investigation. Thereby we had forensic accounting and investigation. That is why the language. And as a matter of practice, we should encourage, at least we should educate our members, and we should be ambassadors to encourage not to use the word forensic audit. I mean, it's very difficult. Everybody still is using forensic audits. I get all my appointment letters in the name of forensic audit, but still, at least we should try, because we have propagated the standards. We should discourage the use of the word forensic audit. Instead, we should keep on forensic accounting. That is the global way also. Yes, that is the global nomenclature, or global nomenclature also. Forensic audit is very specific to our Indian context.
So thank you for clarifying, and we go with forensic accounting terminology henceforth. And
see, if you want to bring in the investigation angle, you can always say forensic investigation.
Yes.
Okay. But mixing forensic with audit is very two opposite sides of the coin, which is why it's not desirable.
I think now for the participant, it's very clear about the difference between audit and forensic accounting, and what is the right way to approach and right way to proceed. So, Mr. Dua, can we go to the what are the indicators of potential fraud in your considered view?
Right. No, thanks. Basically, see, when we are looking at some sort of alert signal, which is why we need indicators. There has now become what I would call a very acute requirement, a very strong desire to get alerts in terms of alarm bells, that kind of things that ought to start alerting the management, particularly. Of course, the investigators and auditors and professionals come later from a detective point of view. But then we need this prevention to begin with. And in between prevention and detection, we need indicators. Okay, because preventative measures should stop us from the culprits to take undesirable steps and crossing the Lakshman Rekha and indulging in unethical activities. And then the detective measures should be there so that if people who do cross the Lakshman Rekha are able to be, identified, and certain action should be taken. But in between these two is something what you just mentioned as indicators. And these indicators are like some sort of, probes that should be out there that should alert management that things are not well, or even the board of directors because many a times the board of directors are in a very reactive mode and they don't get any signals or any warnings that, there's a ticking time bomb that is about to blast. So what we need is these indicators, and these indicators could be in the nature of, for example, you may, if somebody does a complete analysis of the past frauds that have happened and try to do some sort of an analysis on what are the kind of high risk situations that led to this kind of a scenario, then one thing that comes out very clearly in these exercises is that you have a very domineering personality right at the top. Okay, and this domineering personality has been given or has usurped so much powers that they have become somewhat of a loose cannon, able to do whatever they want to do without much controls over them, and at times even intimidating the people who are supposed to control them, like the board of directors. So this is one example I'm giving you. A domineering personality could be an indicator. But other than that, the professionals have to look at the usual things. Like we as chartered accountants are groomed to do risk analysis in many ways. And in this risk analysis, we come up with a lot of things that we ought to look at, like the financial ratios and things like that. And these numbers tell us the story of what really is going on. And we've been trained to, they say, smell the tea leaves using the numbers. So what I would say is we as professionals need to have a long list, our own list of things that we ought to look at in terms of indicators, which would in the right direction we're on our exercise. So I'm not just, other than some of these examples that we ought to look at. Financial numbers is one of them, but the culture and other things are also there. And then behavioral patterns of individuals is also there. So there's a whole lot of things that need to come together, and the professional needs to look at the whole environment and not just purely the numbers that ought to tell him that there is something wrong in some portion, some corner of the organization.
Mr. Dua, we are getting some feedback from the participants that occasionally your voice is breaking. So if you can just look into that. In the meantime, Mr.
And what I'll do is I'll just sign off for 1 second and rejoin with another connection.
Okay, sir. Okay.
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 Just give me a moment. Thanks.
Yeah. Mr. Pandey, would you like to add something about the indicators of potential fraud?
I'll tell you, indicators of fraud, they are very situation specific. So, there's no generic checklist of indicators of potential fraud. See, the beauty of forensic accounting, domain is that there is no specific checklist. It's all tailor made. मतलब वो क्या, वो 42 का शर्ट नहीं है, सारा वो सूट है कि custom made ही है, and it's totally dependent on situation. But then adding to what Harish was telling, if you want, we can have a broad bifurcation of red flags, as we call them. The indicators, we call them red flags. So we can have something called as behavioral and then something called as financial. It again totally depends on the situation. If you're looking at a broad based, or as you said, the 22,000 crore ABG shipyard ka fraud, if you're talking. So, if you're looking at a fraud like that, then probably, there can be a red flag as to constant increase in debtors, constant increase in payables, falsification of revenues, things like that. Again, we can also go to the example what Harish sir said exactly, that domineering personality was the word that he used. So, intimidating behavior, not sharing documents with anyone, pressing that only my version of the document should be used, insisting that the provisions are done with experience and I am the most experienced. So, infusing subtle subjectivity that those are certain red flags which can be common to all situations probably.
Thank you, Mr. Pandey. Like frequently, a man of wisdom once told me, which I frequently speak to, tell my clients also, that in any organization, there are 10% of people are those who will always flout the rules and do something which is of the self-interest. No matter, and 10% are those who are always very honest, and irrespective of the environment, they will always be doing something which they ought to do. 80% of the organization's person are fence sitters. So they will go to the first 10% if the process and processes are not strong, not good, and they will go to the second block of 10% if the processes are good. So this I frequently try to use when I start any assignment with a client, which is in the nature of other than the nature of statutory audit and other usual things. Mr. Pandey, I have one very basic. What are the commonly used mechanism for perpetrating fraud in your considered view? What are the commonly used mechanisms?
Commonly used mechanism, they are immense and numerous. So first of all, I see Dua Saab, he has come online. If you can please unmute him and spotlight his.
Surely. Vivek, can you please do the needful?
Make him a co-host. Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
So coming to the common ways how frauds are perpetrated, it's a long list. It can go from something as simple as fudging the bank statement to something like passing the necessary entries in the treasury accounts, because treasury accounts are something which seldom people see and fewer people understand. So all fraudulent entries are routed through treasury account. Yeah, very recently, let me tell you a very recent case. Probably it's still not reported. तो आप लोग जैसे ITR करते हैं ना, वैसे हमारे यहाँ भी पुलिस में रिपोर्ट नहीं हुआ है. तो ये unreported case है जो मैं आपको बता रहा हूँ.
Very good.
It's a government organization. I was shared in confidence by one of my colleague chartered accountant, because he called me to seek my opinion as to how should he proceed in this. What is the modus operandi? It's a government organization which lots of which works on lots of tenders. Okay. Now for every tender they take something called as EMD and security deposit. Okay. अभी 10 साल पुराने EMD और security deposit आ रहे हैं. उसमें से कुछ कंपनी ऐसी भी हैं which have ceased to exist, or there are few people who have ceased to exist, who are no longer interested and who are not coming to ask for their deposits. Now, vendor payments have been created and bank account is debited by crediting those EMDs and security deposits. So probably there may be some nitty-gritty, and it may not be as straightforward as I'm telling. Of course, it may be covered under layers of the documents, but somehow our friend, the chartered accountant, he managed to find this. So there are numerous ways of creating fraud. In fact, I always have a slide in my presentations when I give. I have a slide where, there's a human brain, and then I have written in captions that the human brain is only limitation to innovate frauds. So there can be as many number of frauds possible. It's only your thought which is a limitation. बाकी सब कुछ होता है.
Okay. Thank you. I think we have lost Mr. Shinoy in the technical thing. Vivek ji, if someone can speak to him and try getting him reconnected. In the meantime, we are proceeding with the discussion with the other panelists. Mr. Dua, you have in the past headed internal audit functions in large corporates, and you like, in your view, how does internal audit contribute to the requirement of forensic audit, and what are the expectations of stakeholders of internal audit? Frequently we get to hear from our internal audit clients कि कोई fraud है क्या इसमें, आपने कुछ देखा क्या? हालांकि things are objectives are different, but stakeholders' expectations are always there. So in your immense experience as heading internal audit, how does it contribute to forensic accounting, forensic requirement, and for subsequently also expectations of the internal audit stakeholders?
Very good question. Am I audible now? Am I better?
Yes, audible.
Excellent. Yeah, very good question, Rishi. I think this is a perennial issue that keeps coming up. And there is always this expectation from our stakeholders, especially the promoters. See, what they want is no surprises, as we all know. Okay. And whenever an unpleasant surprise, like a fraud, comes up, then everybody seems to have knee-jerk reactions. And that's one of the things that is very unpleasant and is something that I would rate as the number one requirement that we as internal auditors should look into. See, the other unpleasant surprises of weaknesses in systems and controls and maybe leakages of revenues here and there are minor things. And even in the fraud area, petty thievery is still palatable in the sense the promoter will say, "Haan, theek hai, isko jara dekh lo karke." They will say, "Take care of it." But if you talk about a real fraud where you have big monies and you have senior management indulging in something, then that is just not acceptable. So as an internal auditor, I would have to do my risk assessment in such a way that my audit plan is focused to detect and unearth any and all frauds. And so the priority has to be in this area. And what it does is, if you don't do that, then all the good work that you're doing in the other area just gets thrown away behind the scenes. And ठीक है यार, वो अच्छी रिपोर्ट निकाल दी थी, बोर्ड को खुश कर दिया था, देखो ये big bomb blast हो गया. What the hell were you doing, yaar? Couldn't you hear the ticking time bomb and those kind of, and your whole credibility goes for a toss. So as internal auditors, my submission to all the professionals is, look, if you don't do an audit, but you do good work unearthing frauds, you've really contributed to the organization. Because if there is even one fraud going on and you've overlooked it, it will just come and bite you in a big way. Okay, so you have to give top priority to fraud. Statutory auditors can say they are there to give you
True and fair.
Yeah, assurance of true and fair materiality and all those kind of things are good for them, not for us, not for internal auditors. Internal auditors do not get forgiven if there are frauds that we were not able to unearth. And therefore, see, we need to have very strong probes, the thing that you talked about earlier. Indicators are the things we need to focus on. Going out and looking for the fraud is the approach that has to be. And, Vivek, your President Vivek, earlier in his opening remarks just mentioned internal audit and the whole fraud area is going to change because of forensics. And I'm very much endorse his view because we as internal auditors would have to put forensic right there at the very top, because the forensics accounting skills is what will help us to unearth the frauds. If you start getting into the details of forensic accounting and the skills that are required to do forensic accounting and investigations, then you will become a much more proficient internal auditor as well. That is my view. And, and the reason I say that is because you have to come with a very different mindset. Just as an example, see, the statute auditor will say, I am a watchdog, not a bloodhound, and everything is okay until proven, kind of an approach. Not for us. As in forensic accounting or as an investigator, we have to have something that is there in the standards called predication to fraud. Okay, we work on a predications as in forensic auditors, and Durgesh will elaborate on it because he's a master of this thing. He'll tell you how we as forensic investigators look out for predications, and we look out for these indicators, and we have our antennas up when we're out doing our regular work to be able to come up with the the red flags. We also call them red flags, as you know. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say on that. Durgesh may want to elaborate if he wants.
Thank you. So, Mr. Pandey, yeah, on internal audit and forensic accounting, overlapping or leading one to another.
Yeah, so see, I'll tell you, personally for me, if you say forensic functions are an extension of internal audit. So a more natural qualification for a forensic domain would be somebody who specializes in internal audit, because there are lots of similarity in both the function. The only difference which I personally find is that the intent element, which is an ingredient of fraud, is not there in the internal control assessment. Whereas when we do a fraud risk assessment, we do have to see the intent element as well. We'll be discussing more on this when we have our workshop. I am supposed to speak on fraud risk assessment, so probably I'll be touching upon this. But then you always, when you see both the functions, you always have this question in mind ki acha agar isme ye hai to usme kya hai. So it's a natural extension of the internal audit, and I cannot agree more that it's a sunrise sector. हम तो 5 साल से कर रहे थे. Fortunately ऐसा हो गया कि यही मेन स्ट्रीम हो गया, नहीं तो हम तो साइड प्रैक्टिशनर थे. ठीक है, तो it is the new domain. Of course, it is the new sunrise domain, new era, and I fully agree with Dua Saab that it has to be, the forensic angle has to be embedded either in form of person or in form of tech in the internal audit function to make it effective. Otherwise, there will always be a complaint. Anyways, anything which is signed by a chartered accountant is considered as sacrosanct. It is considered as sacrosanct कि नहीं, एक बार chartered accountant ने दस्तखत कर दिया है तो अब ये बिल्कुल ऊपर से आया हुआ मैंडेट है, इसमें कुछ भी आगे पीछे नहीं हो सकता है. We are facing such challenges. In light of such situation, if we don't embed the forensic tools, terminologies, thought process with the internal audit function, it will not be as effective as it should be. So lots of things are overlapping. I fully agree with that.
Thank you, Mr. Pandey, and it's a very insightful discourse for the participants about overlapping internal audit and external audit frontier, internal audit and forensic accounting frontiers. Mr. Pandey, you have worked with so many regulators, as we got to understand from your profile: ED, CBI, SEBI, and police, and so on and so forth. So what, in your view, the participant chartered accountants should imbibe in their skill set to be of use, to be of utility to the society in the resistance of the regulators?
See, I'll tell you, working with the regulators and working with business is totally different. And every agency has its own mandate. So the moment you start working with law enforcement agencies, they are least bothered about the business aspect, and they are concerned with the mandate that they have. They are enforcers of law. So they have the mandate that they are interested in the culprit. They are interested in the head which has committed the crime, which should be put to trial. So that is something totally different when you work with the law enforcement agency. Whereas the moment you work with businesses, that includes the banks, because I have had the privilege to interact with the independent directors of State Bank of India, and on the same day I had a discussion with Serious Fraud Investigating Office. So both the discussions were poles apart. Whereas the Serious Fraud Investigating Office was interested in finding the culprit, कि हमको तो ये चाहिए कि किसने fraud किया है. State Bank of India was interested that भाई हम तो व्यापारी हैं, we are interested in the business. ठीक है, fraud हो गया, but then I need to monetize my loan, I need the funds. So that objective differs from regulator to regulator. The moment you go for an investigation by SEBI, it becomes, you have to find the malified intent and the fudging in the stock prices, okay, or it may be insider trading. The moment you go for a bank fraud of CBI, you investigate on behalf of CBI, they are interested in finding whether the money has been diverted from the for the purpose for which it was sanctioned, whether the money has been diverted or not. The moment you investigate on behalf of Enforcement Directorate, so we have done that. The moment you investigate on behalf of Enforcement Directorate, they are interested that 468, 471, you know, 468 and 471, these two sections of the IPC, these are mostly invoked in financial crimes. These are, one is forging the document, one is usage of a forged document. If these sections are invoked, we should find a definitive evidence that these documents are forged. The moment these things are proved, entire money becomes proceeds of crime. If it becomes proceeds of crime, then the Enforcement Directorate has an authority to attach the assets. So it's totally dependent on what agency or what is the mandate, which agency is appointing you or what is the mandate. It totally depends on that. And the investigation style, the method of investigation, the depth of investigation, yes, even the depth, the writing of report, everything is different. So I have seen reports where it is written that please excuse me for the sections. I'm putting a disclaimer that please excuse me for all the sections which I'm telling. I'm not a qualified lawyer, so I may be wrong. I am not qualified in Companies Act as well. मैं किताब पढ़ के ओपन बुक के जमाने का आदमी हूं, तो मैं किताब पढ़ के सेक्शन लिखता हूं, तो अगर कुछ गलती होगी तो YouTube पे आप लाइव दिखा रहे हैं, तो गलती मैं स्वीकार करता हूं. So अगर the moment the moment you put certain sections, the moment you put certain statutes, they have to be followed by the letter and the spirit both, only then the section is invoked. Like I'll tell you, there are simple nuances, whereas for an organization is least bothered that whether it is an embezzlement or it is a theft, kick him out. But the moment you invoke, you go for police investigation, embezzlement का definition अलग होता है, theft का definition अलग होता है. So theft is simple larceny or stealing, whereas in embezzlement, if you want to invoke embezzlement, that is, you have to invoke breach of trust also, because the person has to be in lawful possession of the asset. Only then there can be embezzlement. I can embezzle only if I have lawful possession, otherwise I cannot embezzle. So if the opposite counsel, if the defense counsel proves that I am not authorized to possess the assets, और चार्ज मेरे पे लगा है कि मैंने एसेट फॉल्सिफाई किया है, मैंने एसेट ले लिया है, और वो ऐसा प्रूफ कर दे कि मैं एसेट रखने का मेरा अधिकार, वो मेरे अधिकार क्षेत्र से बाहर है, in such a situation the entire case falls apart. So the style of investigation is totally different. In case of companies, the objective is that we want a reasonable evidence, because most of the companies are not very keen on pursuing it with law enforcement agencies unless it is very large fraud, or unless it is something where they have to take it for law enforcement. The companies are not very keen. So what will they require? They will require some reasonable evidence by way of which the person can be showed the door gracefully कि भाई हमको तुमसे कुछ नहीं लेना, तुमको हमसे कुछ नहीं लेना, यहाँ से चले जाओ, ये हमारे पास evidence है. Otherwise, if you don't listen to us, then we will do something which is not desirable for both you and me. So the style differs from agency to agency.
So the professional who is conducting forensic accounting and also forensic investigation and all have to be adopt the nature of a bloodhound and not a watchdog. So and he also or she also needs to be aware of the various fine definitions between under the various act, and also the objective. One has to put oneself in the shoes of the client whom the service is provided, whether it is an ED or whether it is a company or whether it is and accordingly think in those lines and align the report on those lines and carry out the investigation also on those. Mr. Dua, you want to add anything?
Yeah, very good point. Again, you raised this phenyl example of bloodhound and watchdog. See, you would have to be appointed as a bloodhound. Only then can you act as a bloodhound.
True.
So your mandate will tell you whether you are actually supposed to identify the fraudster or not. And when you do your forensic work, then you will have enough evidence pointing to the fact that the person has probably indulged in a fraud or not. The evidence will speak for itself. Now, and I want to elaborate on what Durgesh said. Very rightly, he was putting caveats about not being a lawyer and therefore being excused for the legal angle, and that's very important. You know, as accountants and as investigators, even as auditors, we are not legal experts. And if you're talking about somebody being adjudged as a fraudster, then only the judge can pass a judgment that the person has a fraudster, because the judge is the person who will decide whether he has got all the evidence as required as per the legal evidence law, whether he has all the evidence that will confirm the person to have broken the section that defines what a fraud is. Okay, so the final word is with the judge. I, as a chartered accountant, cannot go to my client and say, this guy is a fraudster. I'm not the judge. I can say I have enough proof collected for you to decide if you are a lawyer, or you can take him to the court of law and adjudge him as a fraudster. I, as a professional, forensic professional, or just investigator, will gather the evidence which I believe is required for somebody to make that call. Okay, the call, of course, can be made by the client himself, like Durgesh was saying. If the client wants to just fire the individual in the corporate world, yeah, he will take my evidence and he will make his decision. But there's enough compelling evidence that this guy has indulged in unethical activities and stolen money from the organization. But the client could be your, enforcement agencies who hire us as well. Like Durgesh does a lot of work, and these people will be very interested on finding the fraudster, like he said. And for that, you have to gather the evidence. As an expert, we're experts at gathering evidence. Okay, that's our expertise. We know how to smell out where the evidence is. Like, for example, when I'm a forensic expert and I'm looking for diversion of funds, I know how to follow the route the funds have taken, from which bank account to which bank account, and how to get that information and how to present it in a compelling manner to convince the reader that, yes, this is how the funds have moved from, shell companies to whatever, or through inflated pricing of related parties and all. I'm an expert in that. And I'll gather the evidence that my client wants to be able to make a judgment call on a diversion of funds. But at the end of the day, I will not issue a report that will pronounce judgment on any individual. I will have enough evidence to be able to tell the person that ये पैसा इधर से निकल के कंपनी से उस बंदे के अकाउंट, पर्सनल अकाउंट में गया. Okay, and therefore it seems obvious that he is siphoned off the funds. So that is my job as a forensic expert. I will do all that and provide those kinds of services, because that's my expertise. But I does not mean that I don't know anything about the law. I need to know the law, because I will also have to report that there is a violation that has happened here. Violation of either the terms of the debt loan and covenants, or a violation of the transfer pricing regulations, or a violation of any other legal provision. I will have to know enough law to be able to say there is a violation there. Okay, so the receiver of the report will then say, here's the evidence, here's the violation. That's where I believe this is what has happened. They will make their judgment call.
So essential element is to collect the evidence as per the mandate received, which is pointing out whether to fraud or not, but not passing the judgment.
Correct.
And that it is for the law enforcement authority to and for the judge rather to pass it. But there's one very small curiosity here, that as an author of the report, would I be required to attend court hearing when called upon? In your experience, and will it be necessary for me to go to the court and vouch by my report, something like that?
As a witness, you may be called in to explain your reports and its content and its element. So that's something, those costs would have to be factored in. As an expert, you need to be alert to the fact that some of your time is going to go into that direction. But if it's something that is over and above the norm, then you should be able to, anticipate that. Like, for example, it's a very high-profile case, and there will be enough and more hearings going on. You would have to anticipate the fact that a lot of your time may go in that direction, and whoever is engaging you, you may want to have a separate arrangement with them in some sort of fashion. Look, I will do my work and give you the evidence. And after that, if there has been a lot of calls that require my presence to help you and support you, then I will bill you separately for that. That is something that you ought to be aware of and try to negotiate separately, because those time and effort can also mount up a lot. Okay, that's my view. I don't know, Durgesh has more of a experience in that.
Yeah, Mr. Pandey, would you like to add anything on this?
No, what he says is absolutely correct. I mean, while quoting the fees, you have to keep in mind, देखिए ऐसा है ना, court appearance is not a choice. एक बार चॉइस दिया जाएगा, दूसरी बार चॉइस दिया जाएगा, तीसरी बार विटनेस के अगेंस्ट में नॉन बेलेबल वारंट आता है, फिर आपको वहां जाना पड़ता है. सो इट्स नॉट अ चॉइस. Yes, of course, there is a myth that you can disclaim your liability by writing 4 pages of disclaimer. But I believe otherwise. If the court wants, it totally depends on what is the gravity and what is the importance of your report. If the report itself is not grave enough so that it can influence the decision in the case, then I don't think you will be required. The report is sufficient because the advocate in any case will be pleading from the report. But if the defense counsel, I always use the word prosecution and defense because we are more from the prosecution side because we work a lot for law enforcement agencies. But then if the defense is insistent and if it wants to ridicule the report, or there's something on which the prosecution is banking upon, that no, the chartered accountant has mentioned in his report, para 14.1, that money has been transferred from account A to account B by using forged signature or by using signatures which are not legitimate. There is a certificate from the lab which says that the signatures are forged. In that case, if the accountant is called, and then he may be questioned as to what made you think that these transfers are illegitimate. If there are 20 transfers, why do you say that only these 4 transfers are illegitimate? Such questions are asked. So you have to be prepared with such questions also. That is why if someone asks me for a forensic practice ki ek line mein agar aap kuch nasihat dena chaho to kya bologe, I always say, I say this multiple times in the workshops also, that in a forensic practice, do what you write and write what you do. So please do everything what you write, and please write everything what you do. Even if the person has abused on your face, write in the report that unsavory remarks have been made to the auditor despite that the auditor has attempted to do the work. We have had instances where we have made a timeline as the part of the report, that appointment day 0. So appointment on 15/4, whatever, that is considered as day 0. Records, first tranche of record received day 63. Second tranche of record received day 74, because there was an allegation कि मैंने अपना रिपोर्ट डिले किया है. भाई मैंने अपना रिपोर्ट 4 महीना डिले दिया है. देखिए ऐसा होता है ना, जब आप कचहरी में जाते हैं ना, when you are in court, the objective of the defense is to protect his client vehemently at any cost. That may be at the cost of your reputation as well. He is least bothered. He is interested in the fees that he'll be getting, and he's interested in well-being of the client, which is to me, which is absolutely correct, because he is following his mandate. So you have to be prepared for all types of eventuality, because the first thing which will be ridiculed is your character, is your straightforwardness, is your transparency, is your intellect. There are cross-examination reports available in public domain which says that if I quote this, then it says that, I'm taking a reference point, it says that para 14 point number 6 of this mandate, this standard says that you have to do the work this way. you have not done this way. There are cross-examination documents which specifically say that ISACA manual so-and-so, point number so-and-so, hash total has to be taken while capturing the evidence. Have you taken the hash manual? Because you are a CISA certified professional. Why didn't you know that you have not done? And then a simple statement, Judge साहब इन्होंने कुछ काम ही नहीं किया है, ये तो सब motivated है, vested है, you know, और खत्म हो जाता है केस ऐसा. But then, you know, I am talking at a level here. In most of the practice that we do, that is a level here. The police investigation are the most difficult form of forensic practice. I am not telling this because I do it a lot, but trust me, they are most difficult because every day you fear being ridiculed in front of a judge if you have not done your homework properly, if you're not prepared. So that is there. In corporates, the job is relatively easier from evidence perspective, only evidence perspective. I am not telling anything else. It is as difficult as it is. But the quality of evidence in case of law enforcement has to be very strong because a criminal liability is there. Somebody's life hangs on balance. Your report decides whether the person will be getting bail or jail. Whereas in case of a civil dispute or in case of a company's case, there it is not a question of life and death. There it is a question of quantification of the amount or somebody being relieved from the job. So the quality of evidence can be, you know, a little bit you can be relaxed.
Yeah, that but just on that point, Durgesh, very important thing you just mentioned, and I think it's worth re-emphasizing to the professionals, is that you have to go on the assumption that your report will get torn apart through cross-examination, and each and every evidence of yours can be subject to immense amount of scrutiny. Why is not this and why not that kind of a thing. So there will be cross-examination of the content of your report, and that's why your report has to be very, very solid, coming from the evidence law. Okay, the law of evidence, has to be the basis on which your evidential matter has to be gathered. So that is one thing that each professional ought to know, that when we do our regular audits, even internal audits, our evidence gathering is not as robust as it is as per the requirements in this case, in the area of forensics and whatever, because the evidence that we present as in audit reports is never subject to any cross-examination by anybody, third party, other than disciplinary, committee. If it ends up there, they will be the first body who will cross-examine your paperwork, or maybe a peer review can raise some shortcomings in your paperwork quality. But it's very different here. It's very different. You have to go on the assumption that it is get torn apart.
Just to add, probably you'll also remember when we were in Hyderabad, we had, I'll not name, but we had a senior partner from one of the very large accounting firms in our country. And then the exact words which he chose was that we vet every word that we write in the report. He did not use the word sentence. He said that we vet every word that goes into the report.
Correct.
So this is a tremendous takeaway. Write what you do and do what you write. And I'm also reminded of an age-old saying, which is a motivational thought. I think Mr. Shinoy would appreciate that. Talk the way you want to be, and you will be the way you talk. So, before President Vivek pinks me about the time, I have one or two more learnings to be received from both of you. One, Mr. Dua, you have been instrumental in the framing of internal audit standards and also FAIS, forensic accounting and investigation standards. And as the topic of this panel discussion goes, that forensic accounting, are we ready? So this FAIS, how do you think does it make the professionals ready to adopt this practice despite all these cautions which has been just cited?
No, I think in this and thanks for bringing this up. In this area, the institute has to be really complimented for taking the initiatives. In fact, it is two things I want to make. First of all, these are one of the first globally the first standards on this topic that have been put together on forensics and investigations. No other accounting body has such body of knowledge put together. And secondly, if you as a professional go through them, I think you will be very pleasantly surprised with with what's in there, because what it will do is it will get you not just technically ready, but also mentally prepared to be able to undertake these kind of assignments. And you will see what I would say is a vast improvement in the manner in which you will embark upon doing these engagements, and also delivering the output that will be what I would say is a very high quality output. And because the main reason for that is that these standards are written from a principle-based objective. They are not telling you what to do, or rather how to do something. They're telling you what is expected of you. Okay, they are defining the outcome as opposed to giving you a checklist of things to do, because in a checklist mode, you generally get trapped in a tick box approach. Whereas these are telling you, well, look, if you are issuing a report, this is what we expect from it. If you're doing planning, this is what's expected of you. If you are doing the actual groundwork, then there is generally a phase 1 and a phase 2 approach that you can take. Phase 1 behind the scenes, phase 2, includes interviewing and includes face-to-face interactions and things like that. And so if you're issuing a report, make sure that you spell out the findings and present the facts in a certain way without passing judgment and things like that. So they basically prepare the professional in such a way that it would actually impact the quality of the output. And that is what I think these standards will do. And you will find that once you've gone through it, you will really embrace these because they're so compelling. They're so compelling. They come out of such a robust process that has been executed in a very short time frame. And all compliments to the institute and the chairman and the vice chairman at the time who drove the agenda, including our CCM from Kolkata, Mr. I think Pradeep. Sorry, what was the name? Vivek, remind me the name of your.
Ranjit Agarwal sir the.
Ranjit Agarwal sir. He was very instrumental in fact kicking off the whole process with the team from Kolkata. So the Kolkata team were the pioneers who started the bus, started the engine and put it in gear 1, and then we helped them with a nationwide approach on this. So there was a lot of good stuff that came out of Calcutta in getting this whole thing off the ground. And that's why I'm strongly recommending everybody to just go through the book. It won't take you long just to go through this whole book. They're very pleasant to read. And once you've gone through it, you will be very pleasantly surprised.
So it's a strong message from the authors of the standards to follow the standards, to embrace it, and also keep on listening to the stalwarts and getting their insights onto so many intriguing topics within the forensic accounting domain. Mr. Pandey, you have consulted both internationally and nationally, Asia, Africa, and I wish you all the 7 continents for that matter. So, what do you think is the difference between in the circumstances, in the types of fraud, in the type of regulators between India and other parts of the world?
So I'll tell you, I was very pleasantly surprised when we had sessions with Sri Lanka, we had sessions with Malaysia, we had sessions with Asianapool. I was pleasantly, I went there with the objective of learning something and, teaching something. But what I found was the teaching was more, the learning was less. So I don't compliment myself, but I compliment our country, the ecosystem, the thought process, the robustness that we are far ahead. I mean, because I have not worked on this topic in Europe and Americas, so they are the developed world, and we don't compete with Africa and Asia, because we are pretty dominant in Africa and Asia. We don't have anybody to match in Africa and Asia. At least with the intellectual capital, we don't have any match. Okay, we are pioneers in softwares. We don't manufacture. We are not manufacturers, but we have the intellect. So we are pioneers in that. And same goes with this also in law enforcement agencies also. You'll be surprised to know that several states, including the Enforcement Directorate and the SFIOs, they have specific panels and they take assistance of chartered accountants for financial crime. Whereas, unlike India, such modality was not there when I visited our other Asian counterparts. Of course, Africa is too far from us. They have their own set of problems, and this is not an area of priority as of now for them as well. So I have noticed that we are by far, we have come, we have lots of more process and ecosystem developed where assistance of professionals are being taken for the crime investigation. Our numbers or the conviction rate, as it is called, probably they may not justify what I am telling, for the simple reason that we are a very large country with a very large base. You know, a 10 basis point of improvement in any of our key matrices is like few percentage points of the smaller economies. That is the base at which we are there. So we should keep in mind that probably the statistics from going to 5% to 6% will be very large. But as a whole, I have noticed that we are far more developed, at least with our Asian counterparts in this area. The crimes are same everywhere. See, I'll tell you, crime comes from psychology. Psychology comes from human behavior. So lalach, greed, infidelity, the thought process to accumulate all and not to give everyone, these things are everywhere. कहीं अंग्रेजी में सोच है, कहीं दूसरे भाषा में सोच है, हिंदी में सोच है, ऐसा है. So the crimes are not very different, but yes, the investigation methodology, we are definitely doing very well. Yes, there may be people who will be questioning as to how do I say this, because again, let me put the records very straight. We are, and I put it on record again, this being live on YouTube, we are the first body which have published such a comprehensive standards. Let me put to certain speculations which probably will be put in the chat box कि Canadian standards जो थे वो 2008 में हो गए, Australian standards 2006 में हो गए, American standards 2012 में हो गए. साहब, हमारे 23 standard हैं, 23 standards on how to do this. None of the standards are more than 6 to 7 pages. It's a beautiful written document. Whereas all the other Canadian, Australian, or the American standards are not even standards. They are a 4-page document. They are a 4-page document, a guidance note. So, I remember the days when we were drafting these standards. There was a terminology used which I liked a lot. Our standards are at 80,000 feet, whereas the other documents are at 15,000, 20,000 feet. That is the difference. None of them are comprehensive standards, because I distinctly remember it was my job to compare all these standards. So I have an Excel sheet and a Word document which we have shared amongst ourselves. Of course, that's a confidential document as to where the standards are. See, this was a very robust exercise. When we framed the standards, it was and all compliments to the leaders of our profession कि उन्होंने ये मौका दिया और हम ये इतना बढ़िया standard बना पाए. See, I'll tell you, I am practicing in this domain. I always used to say that there are no standards, no white paper, no document. There is not even a standard definition of forensic accounting before this document. How do you prove something in court of law with no authority endorsing the concept? So that void has been filled, I'm sure these standards, if I'm not wrong, these standards will be mandatory from April 23. I don't know, 23, yes, probably April 23. 23 or 24, the dates are, I don't know, the dates have not been notified yet, but very soon these standards will be mandatory. They are recommendatory now. It's a very high level standards, as Harish sir said. These are all what? So none of our standards you will find of 4 or 5 pages. The content is only 4 or 5 pages, and these help even novice practitioners who are new in this profession. It helps them also to build upon something and to have a robust report. That is all I can say for this.
Thank you, Mr. Pandey. Mr. Dua, do you want to add?
Yeah, I just was going through the chat box as we were speaking. I just wanted to clarify something, very good point somebody had raised, that while these standards, you don't need to be a CA to do forensic work or investigations. But if you are CA and if you have done, for example, the FAFD program of the institute, then you would be much better qualified to A, do the work, and B, have a better credentials and output. So that is the reason that I think the institute wanted to have something out there to distinguish itself from the rest of the world, rest of the people who, because see, forensic is now the buzzword and everybody wants to jump on the bandwagon. Okay. Now, but the thing at the end of the day is that you have to have some basic understanding and basic qualifications. Like a CA, to my mind, is a basic qualification one ought to have to be able to do, high quality work. And if you want to complement that with the institute certificate programs like the FAFD, then it would of course give you that extra bit of edge. And just as to conclude on the whole standard thing, I want to just say that it was an amazing exercise because it involved, a lot of professionals. 65 to 70 professionals were actually involved, and we had got over 300 inputs along the way. And that is why I would want to submit to your participants here to take the initiative to be involved with the institute, because now the institute is putting together guidance notes on each of the standards and also updating the FAFD program to align it to the latest thinking in this area. And I would recommend that your participants who seem to be somewhat experts in this area or looking to become experts, which is why they are attending the program, is to come forward and volunteer in this great initiative of ours, which is why we will stay at the forefront, which is why, when you go abroad, you will find that you are certainly ahead of the pack. And that is what made us unique, because we were able to get the collective thinking of expert in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. As I said, the standards and the learnings from the experts. I think Mr. Dua conducts CEO speaks for the institute. I think this series in the television. So, and this is the series on forensic from the experts for the participants of ACA. I personally, it has been a great learning. A lot of doubts got clarified, and I do hope to look forward to attending the entire workshop of 15 hours. With this, I hand it back to the chairman as well as the president of ACA to please profusely thank our our panelists and take it onward the workshop session. So Vivek.
I think Vivek is not available right now, so I will take over the proceedings from here.
Okay, sure.
Right. So I think we had a wonderful first hour. I think, and this has set the tone, for the remaining workshop. Thank you, Harish ji and Tukesh ji, and our very own past president, Rishi ji, for having such a wonderful panel session. And it has clarified more of, the doubts between forensic accounting, forensic audit, and internal audit. So thank you, everyone. And from here, I would like to request Durgesh ji to take the session forward.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so first of all, Thank you very much. And probably I have a session on fraud risk assessment. So I have tried to balance. So first of all, my presentation is, earlier when we started, it was a 3 hour. I was supposed to speak for 3 hours on fraud risk assessment. So I had prepared accordingly. Then we had this beautiful panel discussion, and I was too selfish to interact with both Harish ji and Satish ji for this. So I readily agreed that नहीं कम कर दो, ऐसे भी मुझे अकेले बोलना पड़ेगा, गला दुखेगा, जाने दो यार, फिर कभी सिखा देंगे और ठीक है।
तो दुर्गेश जी आपके पास टाइम पूरा बोल सकते हो।
नहीं भाई, वो तो तुम तो हमको बुला लो वहां पर, ठीक है। Anyways, so I have a 45 slides presentation because I was told, it was specific request of Vivek that we are having very serious people who are looking to make a career out of this. That is why we are having this workshop model. And that is why the numbers, what we are seeing, the numbers. Otherwise, generally, I have seen in your ACA conference, you go up to 1,000 and 1,500, which I have noticed. I get messages from Vivek. So I've seen that. So we have very serious people. So I would like to have a little bit of technical discussion. I do have a complete presentation where I start with the forensic accounting. What is forensic accounting? What is the fraud triangle? I've not included the fraud tree, but then these are something basic building blocks. Okay. So it is 45 slides. I'll not be able to finish the 45 slides. I'm telling from the very beginning, but whatever we do, I will share the presentation with you. You can do that. I'll share my contact details as well. They are already there with you. I'm speaking probably for the third or the fourth time on this forum. It is very difficult to speak again and again on the same forum because, every time you have to innovate and you have to create something. But, thanks to my good friend Vivek, who has been insistent and pressing to speak on the topic, and every time it becomes challenging for me to come up with new things, new ideas, new concepts to speak. Anyways, very quickly, let me start sharing my presentation and then we'll discuss. Okay, so first of all, we are going for fraud risk assessment. Okay, fraud risk assessment. We'll be discussing about fraud risk assessment. As I said, the agenda today was forensic accounting, meaning of forensic accounting, fraud triangle, risk management, fraud risk assessment, meaning techniques, illustrations, and framework. So I have certain illustrations as to how exactly a fraud risk assessment is done, because I have attended lots of workshops where the concept has been taught several times, but actually you don't know how to apply to this. Okay, actually you don't know that if you go to a client, if you pitch the service, and if you land up the assignment, if the client says that नहीं ठीक है हमको करवाना है, फीस भी तय हो जाता है, तो next step क्या है, आप शुरू कैसे करेंगे, how do you move forward? I hope all of us are comfortable with Hindi and English because I'm using Hindi frequently. That is why, if it is otherwise, do let me know. Put a message in the chat box. I restrict myself to English only. So, first we start with the technical definition of forensic accounting. We'll not go into detail, very shallow. We'll be discussing the definitions of forensic accounting and the fraud triangle. I just want to build a base so that we can develop the concept on that. Now, forensic accounting, as we have already discussed in the past 45 minutes, it's a specialty practice area of accounting. It's a specialty practice area of accounting that describes engagements that result from actual or anticipated disputes or litigation. Yes, point very well taken. Please don't worry. I'll speak in English. I'll make it a point to speak in English. I knew that is why the reason I put it. The technology has blurred the barrier of people attending from north, south, and everywhere. So I'll make it a point not to speak in Hindi, and just in case if I'll speak in Hindi, I'll make it a point to repeat everything. So one thing which I can assure, you will not lose anything important. Okay. Now, so it's a specialty practice area of accounting that describes engagement that result from actual or anticipated disputes or litigation. So please understand, the moment we do forensic accounting, we start practicing in disputes and litigation. So a working knowledge of law is essential. It's not desirable. It is essential if you want to go to the zenith. See, I'm changing my tone and we are shifting the gears because I expect a basic level of understanding from the participants. So if you are someone who's attending, who is having the first session of, who's ever attending a first session of forensic accounting, please have a little bit reading, have something for pre-reading so that all of us are on the same footing. Okay. So specialized knowledge and skills specifically are employed to discover evidences. The entire purpose of forensic accounting is to discover evidences. Now, the forensic practice, I had taken a session long back in ACA, if I am not wrong, or probably VIP study circle somewhere, I don't know, in Kolkata, but I had taken a session where we discussed on how to develop a practice in forensic. So I always say that forensic practice can be bifurcated into two parts. One is the detection service, other is the prevention service. Okay. So one is called as proactive forensics, that is the preventive forensics, or we have reactive forensic, that is the detection service. Okay. The concept which you see on screen is for the reactive service, that is the detection service. Now, why do frauds happen? Why do economic offenses or financial frauds happen? These frauds happen if there is a combination of three things, that is pressure, opportunity, and rationalization. Okay, pressure, opportunity, and rationalization. I'm sure all of you are very well versed with these concepts. What is pressure, what is opportunity, and what is rationalization? So when we speak pressure, it connotes, the moment we speak pressure, it connotes greed, living beyond one's means, high personal bills. See, I'll tell you, first of all, let us move as to why do we need to understand this theoretical definition also. The moment you start investigating a financial fraud, you need to get to the motive as to why the fraud has happened. The why this person, or why whosoever who has committed the fraud, why he must have committed, that is answered by the pressure. जिस किसी ने भी चोरी किया है, उसने क्यों चोरी किया है, इस प्रश्न का जवाब प्रेशर एंगल से मिलता है. Whosoever has committed the offense, why he or she has committed the offense, that answer you get by examining the pressure. How the offense is committed, okay, how the offense is committed, that is the modus operandi. That answer can be given by opportunity. Okay, that answer can be given by opportunity. Now, what is meant by opportunity? What is meant by opportunity? So, lack of internal control, that is some process gap, some gap in the organization, they will be called as the opportunity. Lack of controls, they will be the opportunity. Okay. Next is rationalization. So first one was whosoever committed, what was his mindset. Next is opportunity, how it was committed. And third, what would be his frame of mind now, that is after the offense has been done. All these three factors help you to profile the fraudster. You can create an image of the fraudster, character image of the fraudster, as to what kind of character would the fraudster be having. आप एक फ्रॉडस्टर का चरित्र चित्रण कर सकते हैं अगर आपको इन तीनों कॉन्सेप्ट का डिटेल्ड अंडरस्टैंडिंग है. Now this what we talk is a reactive forensic, or this what we are talking is called as a detective area. Okay, detective area of fraud. Mind you, getting work in this area is both difficult and sensitive. Okay, so we come to the other area, which is the preventive forensics. That what we were talking about, fraud risk assessment. Okay, that is called as fraud risk assessment. Now I said we have two areas of practice. The first one is detective services, second is preventive practices. Okay, for fraud risk assessment, how is fraud risk assessment conducted? So the next set of slides will explain as to how frauds are conducted. But what you see on the screen, are the variables by which you can decide as to whether the organization is a high fraud potential organization or the organization is a low fraud potential organization. So something like management, if the management style is autocratic, it's a high fraud potential environment. If the management orientation is low trust, power driven, then it's a high fraud potential environment. Whereas if the management orientation is high trust and achievement driven, you know, if they have a decentralized and long range planning, if performance is not solely based on quantity, if the performance is not solely based on quantity, and if the performance is also based on the quality or long-term business, then it is a low fraud potential environment. Okay, so these are certain pointers, variables, which explain as to whether the company is high fraud potential company or a low fraud potential company. Okay, there is a long list of such points. We have not included that. I have just given few of them for you to have a glance and a thorough understanding. Okay, now coming to fraud risk assessment. Okay, now risk is a concept which cannot be done away in business. Okay, risk is a concept which cannot be done away in the business. What you see on the screen is the popular maxim of the web series where it was told risk hai to ishq hai. This cannot be more true. Business and profits only exist because the businessman takes risk. Okay, the strongest point of difference between professional and businessman is that businessman takes risk. Otherwise, we as professionals, probably we understand the law and our understanding of the statutes and the regulations may be better than the businessman to whomsoever we are consulting. However, his appetite of taking risk, his entrepreneurial spirit is far more than what we have. That is why he is the principal and we are the service providers. So risk है तो ही business है, बिना risk के business नहीं है. There is no business without risk. Okay, now what is risk? So we must have heard this a lot of time, risk. But what exactly is risk? Okay, what exactly is risk? It is situations involving exposure to danger. The situations involving exposure to danger, that is the possibility of loss, injury, or other adverse or unwelcome circumstances, or a chance or situation involving such a possibility. So first we start with risk, we discuss risk management, then we go to fraud risk assessment. Okay, so what is risk? Risk is an opportunity. Risk is an opportunity. So this definition of risk is important to do a fraud risk assessment. Okay, There is an opportunity, but that is risky. You have to mitigate those risks. You have to minimize those risks. That is the entire purpose of fraud risk assessment. Okay, that is the entire purpose of fraud risk assessment. Now we have something called as risk management. How do we manage the risk? We have seen that there is risk in the business. How do we manage that risk? So the systematic process of evaluating the risk, that is identification, evaluation, estimation, comparison with the industry benchmark and standards, and determination of the acceptable risk. What we see is that the damage can be done to this extent, but we are prepared to accept the damage beyond certain instant. That is called as risk management. We evaluate the risk and we mitigate the risk. That would be risk management. Okay. Now, the first step in risk management is risk assessment. That is measuring of the risk. So risk assessment is a subset of risk management, which involves identification, analysis, evaluation, and control. Okay, identification, analysis, evaluation, and control. So quantitatively, if you want to quantify the risk, it is a function of magnitude of loss and probability of loss. That is, what would be the amount of loss and what is the probability that this loss will happen. Now, risk is again, it is inherent to the business. Risk is again inherent to the business. There cannot be any business without risk. Okay, so there is always a inherent risk to the business. Now that risk is addressed and we have something called as residual risk. So first, the inherent risk is addressed. Once the inherent risk is addressed, we have something called as residual risk. Okay, we have something called as the residual risk. That portion of risk which is not addressed, which is not mitigated, that will be called as residual risk. Next, what we have, see, this I called as the sweet spot of business. Now, if inadequate risk has been taken by the business, then profits will not be high. That is, the valuation of the company will not be at an optimal level. Whereas if excessive risk has been taken, then also there will be a fear of fall in the valuation of the company. Okay, the place where the optimal risk is determined is called as sweet spot of the business. And it is, mind you, it is very hard to achieve that sweet spot. It is very hard to achieve that sweet spot of business. Okay, let us move ahead. These are certain statistics as to how do anti-fraud controls vary by size of victim organizations. Now, let us understand the concept of fraud risk assessment. Okay, fraud risk assessment. How do anti-fraud controls vary by size of victim organization? So if you will see, in any organization where fraud risk assessment is implemented and conducted, there is 33% reduction in the median loss due to frauds. Okay, the losses or the probability of a loss on happening of a fraud would be reduced by 33%. Okay, it would be reduced by 33%. Okay, again, I'll tell you, in 52% of the company which have a staff strength of more than 100, in 52% of the company which have staff strength of more than 100, in all such companies, fraud risk assessment has been done. Okay, in all such companies, fraud risk assessment has been done. So the number is very high. Whereas if you look at small companies, then only 9% of such companies have done in fraud, have gone for fraud risk assessment. Mind you, this 33% reduction in median loss is a figure for all types of reported entities. All these figures are being taken from ACFE RTTN reports to the nation 2020 edition. Okay, let us move ahead. What is the purpose of fraud risk assessment? So I said that you can pitch two services for a new business. One is your detective service, second is your preventive service. So if we talk about the fraud risk assessment, if we talk about the fraud risk assessment, then it is, what is the purpose of the fraud risk assessment? Identify greatest risk and vulnerability. So the first point is it identifies the greatest risk and vulnerability. That is what it helps to do the business in a better way. Okay, it helps to do the business in a better way. Next, it acts as a fraud deterrence. What is meant by fraud deterrence? Fraud deterrence refers to a situation where the employees are discouraged from committing fraud. That is, they have that fear in their mind that we should not be doing the fraud. It's not just fear, it is also a culture which is imbibed through ethics training and everything, that fraud will not be done. And if a company is actively conducting fraud risk assessment, it acts as a strong fraud deterrence. Okay. Next, it educates both staff and management. So typically in fraud risk assessment, when you prepare the process flow chart and when you explain the vulnerability that, boss, here your business is vulnerable. In such a situation, your employee, staff, management, everybody is educated as to this is how fraud can happen and this is how it can be prepared. Okay, prevented, not prepared. It can be prevented. Okay, so it educates both staff and management. Okay, it educates both staff and management. It ensures compliance with corporate governance standards. It ensures compliance with corporate governance standards. What is meant by that? What is meant by this? Ensures compliance with corporate governance standards. In many organizations, at least globally, it, as a matter of practice, it is encouraged that the corporate governance includes a clause that fraud risk assessment should be conducted biannually, that is once in 2 years. So it ensures the best corporate governance standards. Okay. Next, if there is an effective fraud risk assessment done, it saves the company. It saves exposing the company to criminal and civil liability. Just in case there is a misdoing in the company can always claim that we have done a robust fraud risk assessment. There is a robust system in place for fraud risk assessment. Despite putting in best of the systems, still a fraud has happened. So as a company, we have put a robust system so that helps the company from being exposed to civil or criminal liability, because it puts in the the thought is put in the mind of the judge that yes, the company is doing a lot to prevent these frauds. Okay. One more thing which I have not written here, which I saw in my practice, is that, you know, in certain cases where the company is having a loss of profit policy, an indemnity policy, anti-theft policy, certain policies like this, there also it is a requirement of the insurance company that there has to be robust practice of fraud risk assessment, that the company actively discourages any frauds from happening. Okay, so those things are there in fraud risk assessment. These are the benefits of the fraud risk assessment. Okay, let us move on. So how should effective fraud risk assessment be done? So a fraud risk assessment should be tailored and structured. It cannot be one size fits all. Okay, it has to be tailored to the need of the company, and it has to be structured, okay, depending on the size and scale of the company. There are some sample fraud risk assessment frameworks, the ACFE's questionnaire and set of documents being one. The ACFE has a very comprehensive documents for fraud risk assessment. Okay, they are in form of checklists where the organization culture is understood, they are rated, they are scored, and then fraud risk assessment is done. So ideas may be drawn from using the sample fraud risk assessment framework. Okay, but modification needs to be done in those so as to suit the exact requirement of the company. Okay, so as to suit the exact requirement of the company. Okay, next, both qualitative and quantitative assessment needs to be done. So it is not just quantitative, and it's not just quantitative. Qualitative assessment also needs to be done. Okay, qualitative assessment also needs to be done as to what is the quality of the controls that have been put. As I said earlier during the panel discussion also, that fraud risk assessment is an extension of internal control function. So if you have something like internal control assessment, fraud risk assessment is by and large similar to that, but it has the wider angle of checking the collusion, that is the intention in case of happening of a fraud, because fraud is said to be fraud only if it is done with a malified or deceitful intention. Okay. Let us move ahead. So what is the technique of fraud risk assessment? Okay, what is the technique of fraud risk assessment? Now, various procedures can be followed to conduct a fraud risk assessment. Various procedures can be followed. It is totally based on nature and circumstances of the company. However, I am giving a standard list. As to what is the technique of fraud risk assessment. Oh, it has been almost 30 minutes, more than 30 minutes since I am speaking. I hope all of you are there with me, है ना? इसीलिए क्या है, वो ऑफलाइन वाले लेक्चर में अच्छा रहता है, ऑनलाइन वाले लेक्चर में डर लगता है, क्योंकि आधे घंटे के बाद से क्या है, लोग छूटने लग जाते हैं, जाने लग जाते हैं, अपने अपने काम में लग जाते हैं. ऐसा लगता है ठीक है, इनको तो 1.5 घंटा बोलना है, ये तो बोले बिना छोड़ने वाले नहीं है.
Going good.
हाँ. So I have to, this reassurance is not for you, this reassurance is for me, so that I don't sleep looking at me. Anyways, yes, a couple of yeses do motivate me, that yes, people are listening to me. So thank you so much, Sridevi S and Vrinda Agarwal, for putting a yes in the chat boxes. Those encourage me that no, people are other than me are also awake, and unlike me, they are also not feeling sleepy. I would like to sleep, but then I don't have that privilege because I have to keep my video on. ठीक है, चलो. Let us come to procedures and natures to be followed for fraud risk assessment. You know, after the third wave, as we say, of COVID was over, I have refused probably 5 or 6 lectures at some very prestigious places where I was supposed to speak for more than 1.5 hours or 2 hours, because I have a very strong thought process that a virtual lecture should not be more than 1.5 hours, because you start losing your audience and the effectiveness is reduced. So I have not spoken. That includes few of the FAFDs also, where I was traveling and I was not very keen on taking these sessions because effectiveness नहीं रहता है. मैं तो उतने ही मेहनत से बोलता हूँ जितना मैं वर्चुअली में, जितना मैं ऑनलाइन ऑफलाइन में बोलूंगा, लेकिन सुनने वाले का इंटरेस्ट नहीं रह जाता. एंड आई डोंट ब्लेम ऑन एनीवन, आई ब्लेम ऑन द एग्जिस्टिंग सिचुएशन. नेवरदलेस, चलो, सो हाउ fraud risk assessment is done. Okay, so we have something, it starts with something called as feedback, survey, focus group, interview, and brainstorming. Now all these techniques are applied on the all the processes of the company. So how we do fraud risk assessment, we do in a lot of companies fraud risk assessment. How do we start our practice of doing a fraud risk assessment is that the first thing that we do is we prepare a detailed process flowchart of the company. Detailed process flowchart. So we have started very recently, we have started a audit of a hospital. Okay, now though that is not a fraud risk assessment, but still what we have done is we have started with mapping all the processes of the organization. So if it is a manufacturing company, we start with the coming of the raw material, issuing of the indents, punching of the GRN, who does that, both QC, whether the QC is done, how does the material moves in the system, what is the input output yield ratio, what is the power consumption, everything we will be documenting first. And we will prepare an entire process flowchart. Okay, we prepare an entire process flowchart. Based on that flowchart, we then prepare the documents. That is the list of documents which are required. Now, this is where these factors, that is feedback, survey, focus group, interview, and brainstorming, these come into play. Okay, these come into play. Please remember, a feedback is called as feedback for a purpose. So feedback need not necessarily mean that it is always positive. A feedback can also be a negative feedback. Okay, there's something called as out of the box thinking and lateral thinking. If you would have heard the word lateral thinking, there's a book by Edward de Bono, where techniques of lateral thinking are explained. There's also a technique called as the 6-hat thinking. Okay, that is, you put a red hat, white hat, green hat, and you think in other manner, and then you solve the problem. So you culture your mind for out of the box thinking. That is how you develop a fraud universe. Okay, आगे है fraud universe किसको कहते हैं और कैसे develop करते हैं वो हम देखेंगे. So this is how you get the information as to what are the potentials of the fraud by feedback, by survey, by having a focus group. That is, if it is a manufacturing process, very technical manufacturing process, for that you require technical experts. So it has to be a focus group which does technical discussions and the technical experts. Next is interview. Then comes brainstorming with technical expert and domain expert. These are the steps which are followed. Now, though management interviews and historical trend analysis and external research through management interviews, historical trend analysis, and external research, a fraud risk universe is developed. Okay, as I said, a fraud risk universe is to be developed. Okay, now what is the purpose of this universe? This fraud risk universe, it includes all possible types of fraud scheme that could impact your company, that could impact the client company. Now, when I use the word fraud schemes, I don't know how many of you are not aware. I'm using the word not aware. I presume that most of you would be aware of something called as the fraud tree. Okay, of something called as the fraud tree. So most of you would be aware of something called as fraud tree. The fraud tree lists various types of occupational fraud schemes that could impact a company. And based on those fraud schemes, based on those, I did have those fraud schemes also in the presentation as well. पर ये क्या फिर 50-60 स्लाइड का प्रेजेंटेशन हो जा रहा था, बहुत सारा हो जा रहा था. That is why I removed that. So the various types of fraud schemes that are available in the fraud tree, those schemes, based on those schemes, you try to create a fraud risk universe as to these are the types and number of times the fraud can happen. Okay, these are the types and number of times the fraud can happen. These fraud schemes are classified according to the Uniform Occupation Fraud Classification System. Interview with management is conducted to provide experienced insight into actual and potential fraud schemes. Okay, the management is taken into confidence. The management is taken into confidence to understand the impact and to understand the potential of the fraud scheme. Now, first, the policies are evaluated. So, process, next is policies. How are the policies evaluated? Identify a risk through process or program flow. Okay, evaluate where can control breakdowns occur. Mind you, we are having a exercise. I am giving a Excel template, not in Excel form, of course in PPT form. I am giving a template where we have done this exercise for few of the factors. Okay, so evaluate where control breakdown occurs. You have to think it out and you have to determine as to this is where a collision can occur. Design the procedure to address those risks. The moment you find that this is the area where which the frauds can happen, like we did a exercise for one of the NGO. There they had a system where the persons who were collecting donations, they got their receipt printed and they could collect the donations. They could also collect the donations. So, you know, it was the mitigating control for that is to put on the website that we have only following agents. If your donation, if your receipt cannot be verified on the website, you put some serial number on the website and the receipt can be verified. You put some QR code on the receipt and the receipt can be cross-verified with the website. These are called as mitigations. So you have to design procedures to address those risk areas. Document the analysis and results in the fraud risk assessment template and create the protocols for dealing with failures. Another important factor, what if fraud happens? What if even after deploying everything, what if fraud happens? So there has to be a protocol that if a procurement fraud is noticed and if prima facie value of the fraud is 10,000 rupees or 50,000 rupees or probably $100,000, it has to be immediately reported to the audit committee chairman. Okay, not the CEO, mind you. It has to be reported to the audit committee chairman. Such protocols have to be given that a team an investigation team of so and so and so, and an external domain expert has to be there. The audit team will have its first meeting within 10 days of the discovery of the fraud, so on and so forth. So such protocols. Now, why these protocols are required? These protocols are required so that when a fraud event happens, when the fraud event happens, you don't go on searching as to ab kya kare, ab kya kare, ab kya kare, hai na? You don't go in that panic mode as to what should be done next. It is to be well documented as to what next is required. Okay. Now, assessment, again, we are continuing fraud risk. Assessment is conducted for each fraud scheme and appropriate response. When I say fraud scheme, you know, the ACFE has put the fraud scheme as financial statement fraud, bribery and corruption, and asset misappropriation. Under asset misappropriation, you have check disbursement or disbursement frauds, and you have fraudulent disbursement, and you have inventory frauds. Under inventory frauds, you have pilferage, larceny. You know, under fraudulent disbursement, you have skimming, larceny, check frauds, so on and so forth. Now, every activity and process which you have determined, you have to conduct an assessment for the fraud scheme. कि भाई अगर एक ही अकाउंटेंट है जो कैश रिसीव भी करता है और बैंक में कैश डिपॉजिट भी करता है, so it's a classic indicator of lack of segregation of duty. So if there is a single accountant who is receiving the cash, who's collecting the cash, receiving as in collecting the cash, and who's also responsible for depositing the cash in the bank account, in absence of a second person doing the cross checking, there is all the motivation to do the fraud because nobody else is checking his work. So each risk, each activity is to be assessed based on the fraud scheme. Next, each risk is evaluated in terms of likelihood and impact. Now the grading and ranking is typically based on likelihood into impact. So what is the impact of this fraud? If one person is collecting and depositing, if both the functions are done by the same person, what would be the impact of this? The impact is that monthly reconciliation is checked by the internal audit team or by the business vertical head of that particular business. Okay. So what is the risk? The risk is कि एक महीने का पैसा वो withdraw कर लिया, right? Because every month you are having a verification. Okay. So the risk would be that he has withdrew money which can be collected in a month. That is the impact. And then you have to determine the likelihood as to what is the likelihood of happening of this. Once the likelihood is determined, that likelihood is multiplied with impact, and then you get the amount of loss. If the likelihood of that happening is 10% and the amount is 500,000, that is 5 lakhs, then the impact of this risk is 50,000. Okay, impact of this risk is 50,000. Likelihood assessment assigns a numeric ranking to the inherent probability that the risk will occur, assuming no controls in place to mitigate the risk. So while determining the likelihood, you have to assume that there are no controls in place to mitigate the risk. Next is impact. Impact assigns a numeric ranking to the impact the risk would have on the organization if it occurred. That is financial loss, consequence of fraud on the company's reputation. Mind you, it's not important that har bar financial loss ho. So let me give you a very different scenario. If the spokesperson, that is someone who speaks to the press, is not someone who's distinct from the finance team, and someone from the finance team speaks to the press, what will happen? There is a risk of sharing of non-shareable financial information, non-shareable confidential information with the press. the person may spill something which he is not ought to say, or there can be an impact on the operations. If the company has certain proprietary practice which is disclosed or which leaks, then there will be a significant impact on the operations. Okay, these assigned risks, these risks are assigned and map is prepared. So what do you do next when you get the likelihood and the impact? There's something called as the quadrant theory, or there is something called as the heat map. I have not had the heat map on the slideshow because I was too lazy to put the heat map, but I do have the quadrants. Okay, but then the heat map is also something similar to that. So you prepare quadrants. Now, how do you put the quadrants? To prioritize mitigation efforts and to effectively allocate the resources, each risk is assigned into quadrant on the fraud risk map. We plot something called the fraud risk map. Now, say you have identified about 10 risks. You have identified 10 risks. In all likelihood, all 10 risks will not carry similar likelihood or similar significance. So the risk of a person stealing inventory is far less than a risk of a CEO falsifying the books of accounts. So the significance is very high in that, and the likelihood of a CEO falsifying the books of account is far less than the likelihood of a person stealing the inventory. Okay, so as you see, you have 4 quadrants. All the risks are plotted. Once you have the risk calculations, then that has to be plotted in these quadrants. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. If you can see on x-axis and y-axis, it is plotting the likelihood, and the y-axis is plotting the significance. Okay, now if you see quadrant 1, these are low risk and low control activities. You may assume those risks. What is meant by assuming the risk? Even if it is risky, you would move ahead कि ठीक है, देखा जाएगा जब होगा तब, है ना? Because risk low है, the likelihood is low, and even if it happens, the significance is also low. Okay, let us come to quadrant 2, where the likelihood is high, but the significance is less. So there is high probability of people stealing. But what will they steal? Petty theft, petty amount. So what do? You monitor that. You don't take any action, but you monitor that. Let us come to the quadrant 3, where the significance is high, but the likelihood is less. Okay, if it happens, it is damaging to the company, but it will seldom happen. It will rarely happen. In such a situation, you detect and monitor. Monitoring is there, and you immediately detect such risk. Whereas if we come to quadrant 4, then we don't accept such risk. Okay, such risk we don't accept, and it is preventing such risk at the source. Such risk is to be prevented at the very source. Okay, it should be prevented at the very source. Now, if you can see, now what I have put is the mitigating control as to how to mitigate those risks. For each fraud risks, certain mitigating controls have to be identified, and these mitigating control should fill 2 criteria. 1, adequacy of design. 2, effectiveness of operation. What is adequacy of design? Adequacy of design is that whether the control item will be preventing. It considers if the identified controls operate as designed. Okay, whether the design identified, whether the design identified, it is preventing such risk, and effectiveness of operation. Next is that depending on the person with whom such risk is being dealt with, and depending on the control, that is whosoever is responsible for monitoring such risk, whether they are equally skilled, qualified to control the effect, to control it effectively, or whether it is a simple tick mark job which is happening. Okay, so evaluating the operating effectiveness involves testing of the controls. Okay, and if you find the risk is not acceptable, then there are remediation points, how to improvise. Then there are plans to remediate the risk. So we have something called as residual risk. So we had inherent risk. Inherent risks are mitigated. What is left is called as residual risk. Residual risks are those risks which are not adequately mitigated by anti-fraud programs or control. Now, what happens for such residual risk? So, whatsoever robust program you are adopting, you will be having something called as residual risk that has to be assumed or monitored. Now, for such residual risk, the process owners are required to develop a remediation plan, and internal audit will follow up and report to the management on progress of implementing such plans. Okay, so risks identified through fraud risk assessment are to be factored in the annual audit planning. Okay, risks identified through the fraud risk assessment are to be factored in the annual audit planning. Results are integrated with the annual risk assessment. Results are to be integrated with the annual risk assessment. Annual risk assessment is performed to ensure that significant financial operational information systems risks are appropriately addressed. It is just explaining that the processes that are there, they should address the significant risk. Audits are prioritized based on the relative level of risk, which includes multiple risk factors in addition to the fraud risk. So your audit is also prioritized. Your management response also is prioritized. The management response is also prioritized. Okay. Now, coming to the next slide, what we have is, as I told you, that we will be having little bit of practical templates as to these are the frameworks of illustration. These framework, they illustrate as to how fraud risk is identified, its assessment is done, responses are applied, and mind you, it's a very प्रोफेशनल एंड स्ट्रक्चरल अप्रोच. सो आपकी भाषा में अगर हम बताएं, हमारी भाषा में, तो ये रिपोर्ट का फॉर्मेट है. आफ्टर कंडक्टिंग द एंटायर एक्सरसाइज, व्हाट इज द रिपोर्ट? Okay, or rather pre-report. The report can be a fancy presentation based on this, because this will be difficult for the management to understand. So you have to have a fancy report which will help you to get your fees. Okay, this may be too technical for the management. So we have an example. Identified risk that is inappropriate journal entries. Likelihood of such risk, it is reasonably possible. Whether it is material or remote, so its significance level is material. Which people or department is responsible? The finance department is responsible. Okay, what is the existing anti-fraud control there? So standard monthly and quarterly journal entry log is maintained. Okay, standard monthly and quarterly journal entry log is maintained. Review process in place for standard entry and non-standard entries subject to 2 levels of review. So there is a review process at 2 levels where standard and non-standard both type of entries are checked and tested. What is the control effectiveness? So this control, it is already there, the design is there, but whether it is effective or not, so control effectiveness is checked, tested by the internal audit and confirmed by the management, or it is also tested by the management. What is the residual risk? Even after having this control risk, even after addressing this risk, and even after this testing by the internal audit, what is the residual risk? It is risk of override. That is, people may not follow the review process. People may not follow the review process, and there is a residual risk, okay, that it will be overridden. And fraud risk exposure is unusual debit credit combination, unusual debit credit compensating errors, वो पता ही नहीं चलेंगे. So that is the fraud risk exposure. Next we have, it is identified. What is the fraud risk identified? Domineering board member, that is conflict of interest. चला domineering दूसरी तीसरी बार आ रहा है, शुरू में भी आया था. So what is the likelihood? The likelihood is moderate. Okay, the likelihood of happening this is moderate. In first one it was reasonably possible, in this it is moderate. What is the significance level? It is significant. Okay, it is significant. Earlier it was material, now it is significant. People, which department is responsible? General management. What is the existing anti-fraud control? So the company has a process of annual conflict of interest disclosure format, and stringent board recruitment and selection policy and processes are done. That is, it is ensured that people who have conflicting position, they are not recruited. Okay. How is the control effectiveness tested? It is tested by external auditors. The external auditors, they have a tick mark policy of checking the conflict of interest form of all the board members, and having responsible and having the list of places where they are key KMPs in the companies. Okay. What is the residual risk? They may not disclose everything. So undeclared conflict of interest may exist. Inadequate understanding of role of the some of the members. Okay. And lack of sufficient background check. It may so happen forged background may also be there. Somebody has fudged the letter. Okay. And fraud risk exposure, lack of established protocol for disclosure of potential conflict of interest, and poor tone at the top. What is meant by this? That it is simply a tick mark job. It is simply a tick mark job where we have poor tone at the top. Okay, poor tone at the top. It's a simply tick mark job, and nobody takes this very seriously. Okay, nobody takes this very seriously. And lack of established protocol for disclosure of potential conflict of interest. Okay. Now this is the, I suppose this is the last illustration which I am having. है ना, उसके बाद फिर हमारे पास कॉमन चैलेंजेस है, कुछ एग्जांपल्स है, फिर खत्म कर देंगे, है ना. शाम तो हो गया है, बराबर है ना, शाम हो गया है ना.
शाम तो हो गया है, बट वी कैन गो ऑन.
नहीं वो तो ठीक है, आप लोग तो रात भर भी जाओगे. हाँ चलिए, कोई नहीं. So what I was I was discussing this. Identified intruders gaining access to the system using default or weak passwords or stolen or reused credentials. Now this is a ICT, information communication technology का है, ये ICT का risk है, computers का risk है. क्या है? Intruders gaining access to the systems using default or weak password or stolen and reused credentials. Likelihood is reasonably possible. In our experience, everywhere we have gone, the first thing what we check is for people who have left the company and whose IDs are working. And we have found in all the organizations, I'm not telling most, in all the organization wherever we have gone, we have found such practices always there. All the IT assets are also not taken back. तो कोई पेन ड्राइव रह जाता है, कोई हार्ड डिस्क रह जाता है, कोई लैपटॉप रह जाता है, लैपटॉप तो ठीक है फिर भी ले लेते हैं, बट ये IT assets भी रह जाते हैं. The likelihood is reasonable and the significance is material. So we have seen accounting entries being done with people who have left those IDs. We have seen vouchers being passed with people, those who have left their IDs. Okay. And the responsible people and department, predominantly it is the technology department, IT department, but everybody has to be cautious. Everybody has to be cautious. Now, existing fraud control is, we have something called as COBIT. Okay. COBIT is a framework. वो ISACA में और DISA में पढ़ते हैं, तो मैं उसमें बहुत अंदर नहीं जाता हूं, बट कोविड फ्रेमवर्क जो है वो ITGRC के लिए है, गवर्नेंस रिस्क एंड कंट्रोल्स ऑफ इंफॉर्मेशन टेक्नोलॉजी एसेट्स के लिए है. ठीक है. सो रेगुलर मैनेजमेंट रिव्यू ऑफ ऑल द पासवर्ड प्रोटेक्टेड अकाउंट्स एंड रिलेटेड प्रिविलेजेस एंड इंश्योर दैट ऑल यूजर्स ऑन IT systems are uniquely identifiable. So when we try to implement such practice in our office, we try to have the logins based on computers, that is user 1, user 2, user 3, user 4. But then we were told by our IT guy that नहीं सर ऐसे पता नहीं चलेगा, क्योंकि आज इसका कंप्यूटर वो यूज करेगा, कल उसका कंप्यूटर वो यूज करेगा, तो आप यूजर बेस्ड रखें, प्लीज कीप नेम बेस्ड. I said, then there will also be lots of hassle. People come, people go. Who will be doing this IT function? He said, no, we have to deploy resource for that, for doing the IT function. Okay. I hope you can listen to music in my background. You know, there is somewhere some marriage going on, and it seems he is competing with me. The louder I speak, the louder he is playing. तो ऐसा लग रहा है कि वो कोई कंपटीशन कर रहा है, कोई गुजराती गाना वाना टाइप्स बज रहा है. कोई नहीं, चलो म्यूजिक बज रहा है, मन लगा रहेगा हमारा भी. ठीक है. सो existing anti-fraud control is regular management review of all the password and to ensure that they are uniquely identifiable. Define and implement procedure to limit, grant and revoke access to the systems. Okay, access to the systems, premises, buildings and restricted area. Who will be testing the control effectiveness? The internal audit may test the control effectiveness. What is the residual risk? Residual risk is weak logical access control in place. What is meant by this? This means that the system would only be as strong as the person's logic who's developing this system. Okay, it will be as strong as the person's logic who's developing system. And fraud risk exposure is unauthorized access key info, unauthorized access to key information. Okay, that is the fraud risk. Okay, now you know, when fraud risk is done, there are certain common challenges. There are certain common challenges and questions. I'm giving a strategy for mitigating those challenges. So first is not using an expert to analyze the fraud risk. Company अपने आप ही सब कुछ कर देती है. No. For fraud risk by area, use subject matter expert. Subject matter experts are mandatory to use the fraud risk area. See, there has to be a blend of both subject matter experts as well as there has to be external experts. The external experts give a flavor of what is happening outside the organization, whereas the internal people, internal staff gives a understanding, thorough understanding of what is the process here in the company. Okay. Next, fraud risk assessment is viewed as one of episodic event with no value addition. Okay, only conducted for 2-3 years. Strategic plan एक कभी कर दिया है, but fraud risk assessment should be conducted and updated at least twice a year. Minimum twice a year is not correct. It's a typographical mistake. It should be at least once in 2 years. Okay, it should be once in 2 years. I'm please sorry for the mistake. It should be once in 2 years. Information and data is hard to use and interpret. So how do you mitigate? Use simple, understandable term. Review for reasonableness of implementing recommended actions for addressing residual fraud exposure. Okay, simple terms and reasonableness of implementing. So the concept that should be implemented, the concept that should be suggested, they should be capable of being implemented, and they should not be too theoretical that it's not possible even to implement everything. Okay. Results of fraud risk assessment are not acted upon. That is mitigation. Mitigation is hold staff process accountable with action plan, deadline for implementation. Of course, if the fraud risk assessment results are not acted upon, there's no point of conducting the fraud risk assessment. So please ensure that the person who's responsible, who's the process owner, who's responsible, accountability is established. It goes for implementing any system. Even we have experience of implementing ERP system. There also we make it a policy कि HR वाले implement करना है तो salary has to come from HR. Finance वाला implement करना है, vendor payment has to go from finance. So you have to make people accountable. Only then this exercise will be fruitful. Leaving the role of risk management and compliance, leaving the role to risk management and compliance unit. That is, you have a dedicated unit and you have given it to them कि ठीक है जी अपना खेल रहे हैं, let them play. Okay. No, it should come from the top management. Solicit heightened interest from all stakeholders. Everybody should be taken along. Everybody should be made a part of this. Risk being controlled. Okay, risk being controlled. That is you are trying to control all the risk. It's not possible. Prioritize which controls to invest in. Next, too many different risk assessments are performed across the organization. Okay, too many different risks are performed in the organization. Adopt a consistent approach. Okay, adopt a consistent approach. What is the approach? Starts at the top, communicate at all level, communicate inside and outside the audit department, communicate often. If you would have noticed, 4 times we are using the word communicate, 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 because the last is listen well, that is also communicate. So the benefit of fraud risk assessment are numerous, but you have to have the communication. Communication is the key. Here I have given certain used cases, like things that if there is a phantom vendor, the description is employee establish a fictitious vendor and submits false invoice for payment. But what is the indicator? The indicator is photocopied invoice, lack of photocopied invoices, lack of invoice to support payments, employee address matches vendor's address. All these things are red flags. Based on these red flags, you can find this, but this is more on the detective side. This is not on the preventive side. However, if you are implementing an ERP system, these checks can be embedded in the ERP system to check for duplicates, to cross-verify employee address with the vendor address. Probably once a year, this can be done to do a preventive forensics. That is why I say they are not isolated. एक का learning दूसरे में इस्तेमाल हो सकता है. Okay. Next, we have conflict of interest. So the description is misusing position to award contracts in firm for return of money, family payment, or gratitude. Okay, other gratuities. Indicator, what is the indicator? lifestyle changes, refusal to change vendors, failure to enable bidding procedures, continuous use of same vendor, significant increase in pricing. अभी इसका mitigation इसी में लिखा हुआ है, इसका mitigation इसी में लिखा हुआ है. Refusal to change vendor, there has to be a vendor rotating policy. Failure to enable bidding procedure, mandatory bidding policy. If bidding is not conducted, then it's a flaw. Okay. Duplicate payment. Okay, this is again duplicate payment. So description is duplicate payments are made to a vendor without services rendered to justify the second payment. This fraud is normally committed by a vendor with collusion with an employee. Okay, mind you, duplicate payment would be more in case of service than in case of goods, because goods have a trail. Okay, goods have a trail, services don't. गुड्स में होगा तो छोटे आइटम में होगा, छोटे आइटम में होगा जिसका ट्रेल नहीं रहता है, कंज्यूमेबल्स में होगा. Multiple duplicate payments of same or similar amount to a vendor or for the same invoice. So there is something called as the same test, same different test, where all the three fields are compared. That is invoice date, party name, invoice number, all the three are compared, that there is no duplicate. Then there is same different test. That is the name of the party is confirmed. The invoice number is the name of the party is same, the invoice number is same, whereas the date is different. That indicates that same invoice is paid twice. So same test, same different test. There are other statistical tools and tests also, which is taught in the FAFD sessions. Okay, this one is kickback or improper payments. Okay, this is kickback or improper payment. So this is often facilitated through accounts payable of a company or individual submits an invoice for services that never occurred. Okay, or invoices submitted as inflated. So paid invoices that lack additional or appropriate supporting documents, invoices submitted without back-end working. Growing frequency of purchase from one vendor. एक ही vendor से प्रेम है, उसी से बार बार लिया जा रहा है. Growing frequency of purchasing from one vendor. Award of contract without bids. Too much vendor-employee proximity. Increase in services. Continued use of same vendor. All these things indicate kickback. Okay. This, I suppose, is the last one. Vendor master file manipulation. Employee modifies current vendor master file. Indicators: unapproved or unnecessary changes made to the master file. Look for tampering with vendor name, vendor address, so on. Okay. So this is vendor master file manipulation. These are certain red flags which are common to procurement. Unusual, unauthorized vendor, large gift, unusual increase in vendor spending. ठीक है, ये तो हमने काफी बार डिस्कस किया है. Round rupee amounts, so on and so forth. This is some additional resource. Yeah, I am having the last slide of my presentation. So this is some more additional resource. So more resources are available on www.acefe.com. Fraud control policy, fraud risk assessment, this framework, fraud questionnaires, fraud surveys, fraud assessment checklist, fraud risk self-assessment tool. There are Excel tools which can be used to conduct the fraud risk assessment. Self-assessment can be done. Okay. With this, we complete the exercise. Communication is of paramount importance. Communication is of paramount importance. Please keep the communication channel very open. Only then a successful fraud risk assessment can be done. Okay. Please be safe, be curious, and feel free to be in touch with me. Okay. My contacts are shared on the screen. So we have another 20 minutes of scheduled time. And I will now hand it over to the to whosoever is concerned. I see Hemant ji is smiling, तो मेरे ख्याल से वही हैं, बाकी सब तो अपने अपने काम चले गए होंगे.
नहीं sir, I think I will be taking over from here. So Dugesh ji, thank you first of all, for the session, for the wonderful session. So I had one doubt only that most of the companies, are covered with this internal financial control framework, right? So where we define the risk control metrics and all, right? So what is different between, this internal financial control framework where we identify risk control and this forensic risk assessment? So what is the basic difference?
Yeah, so I'll tell you. First of all, I am very happy that you have put the internal financial control framework. It was, it is like the elephant in the room, which is there and which nobody acknowledges. Chaliye, theek hai. I would not, dodge the question by asking the question. Nevertheless, let me give you a flavor of that. What do you do in internal financial control framework? How do you assess the risk? Probably the same exercise what I have told is done, bearing the last column. Okay, bearing the last column where we identify. As I always say, see, this is not something which is 360 degree, or rather 360 degrees coming at the same point, which is not 180 degree pole apart from what we are doing in the existing framework. The core difference between internal control assessment and fraud risk assessment is to check the fraud universe based on the fraud schemes. So there are various types of fraud schemes, say revenue manipulation or say inventory pilferage. All these fraud schemes are not systematically defined in the internal control framework. Or if they are defined, it is at the wisdom of the user or the practitioner, whosoever is doing the function. Whereas in case of fraud risk assessment, we have a defined chart of the fraud schemes. Based on these fraud schemes, a fraud universe is developed, and then each one of the fraud potential is tried to address. That is the core difference between internal control assessment and the fraud risk assessment. Internal control is directed to prevent mistakes, whereas fraud risk assessment is done to prevent frauds. That is the biggest difference. Internal control में ये collusion को ध्यान में नहीं लिया जाता है, intentional defeat को ध्यान में नहीं लिया जाता, whereas in fraud risk assessment all these things are also factored into while we do the brainstorming. See, ultimately the process has to be the same. The lateral thinking and creative thinking has to be the same. So I'll tell you, the creative thinking or lateral thinking is not as relevant as it is in fraud risk assessment than in internal control assessment. Okay?
Yeah.
Just a minute. Okay? In fraud risk assessment. It is not as important in fraud risk assessment as it is in internal control assessment. Okay? This is the core difference. This is the core difference between these both concepts.
So I mean, as IFC has come in, so maybe in future fraud risk assessment may come up for big entities or large entities.
Yes, it should be. It should be. That is why the ACFE recommends that biannually there should be a fraud risk assessment done.
Right. So friends, I think if we have any other question, so Durgesh can take up and answer our queries. So floor is open for everyone right now.
Yes, please. Any questions? ऐसा तो कठिन होता है कि बहुत question हो.
Yes, so I think the session was very good. I mean, the first hour, had set the great tone for exactly what exactly is forensic and fraud.
Yeah, I was told to make it technical. This was too technical, and I understand it was too technical. Because this was virtually what we discussed. This was at operational level.
Right.
So this can be used. The slides which I am giving, this can be used from tomorrow to execute an assignment.
Right.
Generally, the CP sessions which are done, they are not at such a granular level. They generally are at a higher level, which give bird's eye view, like the first hour which we discussed.
Right.
उसमें हम ज्ञान की बात करते हैं. ठीक है.
So I think internal audit
कैसे करते हैं उसकी बात करते हैं. Yes, please.
So internal audit has to capture more of forensic and as you rightly said that internal audit forensic is more broader than internal audit, right? So with time we have to capture, all the aspects of forensic audit or accounting, as we say.
Yes.
Bank forensic audits are now requiring, so I will read out the question. So bank forensic audits are now requiring conclusive reports as well as on criminal liability aspects of Companies Act, IBC and IPC. Can we as CS give it on IPC? And for conclusive reports, are there any formats available?
No, madam. First of all, there are no formats available. We are not privileged to have SA700 for forensic accounting assignment. So there are no formats available. Again, the engagement report is also not, the engagement is also totally situation specific. It is totally dependent on the situation. Conclusive or non-conclusive, that is the negotiation between what you do and what the bank expects. So you can give a conclusive, or rather you should give a conclusive report. But conclusive report का मतलब ये नहीं होता है कि he has committed the fraud. That is not for you to decide. The maximum what you can say that based on the findings, we observe that money has been diverted from account A to account B, which was not used for the purpose for which it was sanctioned. According to me, this is a conclusive statement. It cannot be more clearer than this. You cannot write the person is thief. That is not your mandate. I hope I have answered your question. Again, asking that whether you can quote sections of IPC and IBC, if I would be in your place, I would very strongly, dissuade myself from doing such an act. I am not an expert of IPC. Why would I use those sections? Speaking is different. Writing in a report, presenting it is different. So, आपके पास knowledge भले हो, I would not agree to, I would not agree to write such things. Oh, what should be the minimum content of appointment letter? And should it contain brief background? Please read this. इसमें है, हमने अपना ज्ञान इसमें निचोड़ के डालने का कोशिश किया है. कृपया आप लोग इसे पढ़ें. है ना? It's a beautiful piece of document which the institute has come up with, requesting you all of you to please read. There is a format.
Nisha ji, you can unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Hi, sir. So I actually have like forensic experience in both consulting as well as industry, and now I've joined my practice. So the thing is that at least back in consulting, forget industry, but back in consulting, whenever we used to give reports, we wouldn't like there is whether the account can be classified as fraudulent or not, as per the IBC section is what we used to give. However, I have recently gotten a forensic audit or forensic accounting engagement, wherein it is mentioned that we will have to comment on the criminal aspects of the Companies Act, IBC as well as IPC. Now, this is something that I am not willing to take up, like you rightly mentioned that since we are not experts in legal matters. So, but this basically comes as part of the bank's appointment letter. How do you think we would, ideally deal with it? And also with regards to the conclusion, how we generally write the reports is, basis facts, because as and when additional data keeps coming in, generally, since you would know bank audits, you don't get the data from the branch or, the information, the, company then becomes hostile. So for cases like this, how do we deal with conclusion aspect?
Yeah, so two parts. First is the IPC and next is the conclusion. Probably I answered for conclusion, but I'll try to address it again. Let me first answer for the IPC part. So, our first standard is basic principles. In this, you have point number 3.5. It is written skills and competence. I'm sorry for the mirror view, but then there is something called as skills and competence. And madam, for people like you who have such a wide exposure both from consulting and industry, I would strongly recommend you to read all these standards. Most of your problems would be answered by this. So if I can quote, point 3.5 in this, it is on page number 26. It is written skills and competence. The professional shall undertake only those engagements for which they have the requisite competence. Probably this answers your questions. if you don't have the competence, then you should not take such an assignment. And it is like the universe. If all of us don't take such an assignment, then there will be people who will be modifying the contents. So you cannot comment on IPC because you're not an expert. Now, if for the sake of taking business, you take such an assignment, you do it at your risk, which you need to mitigate by appointing an advocate. But still there will be a residual risk because you have to go and appear in court of law just in case something wrong happens. So I would strongly advise to refrain from taking such an assignment where you have to comment on IPC because you have never studied that law. For 5 years of chartered accountancy, we never learn the Indian Penal Code. How are we supposed to comment on that? What section do you know of the Indian Penal Code?
Just to clarify, just to clarify, as in initially so this is part of the bank's empanelment, right? And when we got the letter stating that, we've been selected, for forensic audit for a particular account, in that, this clause was mentioned, which is why we still haven't started it. I am going to go back and talk to the, bank official saying that this is something that we ideally cannot do because I do not have the competency to comment on the criminal aspects of.
I'll tell you a way out. You convince them that you'll engage a lawyer and they'll pay, and then the lawyer will comment on that. And then we have a section in this using work of an expert.
Correct. Okay.
That can be done. That can be the way out.
Okay.
And then I owe a cup of coffee when I come to Kolkata.
Sir, I'm based out of Chennai. So.
Oh, you're based out of Chennai?
Yes. Sir.
I do travel to Chennai as well.
Yes, sir, for sure. Anyways, since I've recently joined practice and, it's a big difference from the Big Four world, I, would definitely seek out your advice, especially in terms of digital forensics, because at least for a mid-size or a small firm, that amount of
digital
investment
forensics is not my area of expert, Nisha.
But at least, like when we look at FRA, like I've seen a lot of FRA engagements get converted into investigations because, that is where, the digital forensics gives that huge push, right? In terms of email backup, mobile data backup. So that is where
that digital forensic everyone knows. Well, that is something very shallow. Even you can learn. It's not very difficult. You just need the right tools.
Right, sir. In terms of investment, that is where, because
it's not a lot of investment. We are live on YouTube. I would not like to speak something ill. You come from a background which portrays everything big. It's not that big.
Sure, sir. Got it. But I will definitely, connect with you.
Please feel free to connect with me. I have shared my contacts.
Yes, sir. I'll do that, sir. I'll do that. Thank you so much for answering my question.
Most welcome and all the best for the assignment.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, so there was also a question. क्या है? Chitish Jaiswal. मेरे ख्याल से मैंने आपका तो question
yes.
I replied to your question. Yes, so the book has that. चलो भाई कलकत्ता.
So we need to refer this to this accounting standards.
Yeah, we need not reinvent the wheel. I don't want to contradict myself where something else is written in the standards. Even I am not expert on those standards. There are 23 of them. I am yet to cover all of them at the back of my hand. I just have a working knowledge of them. Anyways, I suppose we are done.
I think there are no other questions. So just a formal vote of thanks. So thank you, Durgesh, for taking out time and 3 hours of yours was very wonderful to us. So memento for you, just sharing the screen right now. Thank you, sir.
So, sir, we will...
Sorry, so I think screen share में नहीं आ रहा आपका?
नहीं, ये तो आउटलुक दिख रहा है, मुझे दिख रहा है, वो सबको दिख रहा होगा. कोई बात नहीं, ठीक है.
I think sir, एक सेकंड सर, 1 minute.
It's okay.
Sir, done.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So we will end the session from here.